Hey, everybody, welcome to session 153 of the Behavioral Observations podcast. Thanks so much for joining me today. In this episode, Dr. Nicole Rodriguez joins me to discuss a wide range of topics, which I'll get to in just a minute. But to set the context for our conversation, I'd like to start by making the observation that I often see the quote by Skinner, when you run into something interesting, drop everything else and study it. I see that posted on social media and elsewhere quite frequently. In fact, when I plugged that quote into Google, it returned almost 9 million results. Now, I could be wrong about this, but this notion of following one's interest would seem to fly in the face of developing a successful research or academic career. That is, it may be more productive from a publishing point of view to go like an inch wide and mile deep into a particular topic, and that academic contingencies likely nudge researchers away from investigating a wider range of phenomena. So what does all this have to do with today's interview? Well, it seems that Nicole has done quite well for herself in resisting this tendency, and she's been quite successful doing research across a wide area of clinical topics. And in this conversation, we cover many of these research and practice interests, including supporting individuals with restrictive and repetitive problem behaviors, the effects of physical reactions to aggressive behavior. We talk about her upcoming talk at the 2021 Verbal Behavior Conference, and also her outreach to Spanish-speaking clients and families. We get into a couple other topics as well, like university teaching and things like that. And she closes out the show with some fantastic advice that is not only applicable to the newly minted BCBA, but to practitioners of all experience levels. I don't want to spoil it here in the intro, so you'll want to make sure to listen all the way through. Long story short, this was a fun conversation, and I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. This podcast is brought to you with support from institutional tier patron GreenSpace Behavioral Technology. So I want to thank Zara and the folks at GreenSpace for supporting the podcast at the institutional patron level. So for more information on their products and services, check out greenspacebehavior.com. We're also brought to you by HRIC Recruiting. That's right. Barb Voss has been placing BCBAs in positions throughout the United States for just about a decade. And she's been in the recruiting game for about 30 years or so. So when you work with HRIC, you work directly with Barb, and you get a highly personalized and experienced service. So if you're about to graduate, or if you're looking for a change of pace, or if you're moving, or if you really just want to know if the grass is greener on the other side, go to hricolorado.com to schedule a confidential chat right away. And if you are interested in learning more about the benefits from being a Behavioral Observations patron, go to patreon.com/behavioral observations. Patreon members get early access to podcasts, bonus podcast material, discounts on CEU events, including CEUs from FTF and other continuing ed purveyors. We do some Zoom hangouts and much, much more. So to learn more about that, again, go to patreon.com/behavioral observations. Okay, I think that's it for opening announcements. So without any further delay, let's get to this interview with Dr. Nicole Rodriguez.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now here's your host, Matt Sikoria.
Dr. Nicole Rodriguez, thanks for joining me today on the Behavioral Observations Podcast. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you for having me.
The pleasure is all mine for sure. We've got so many things to talk about, and I've had the chance to kind of look at your CV and your body of work, and it's amazing of the different areas that your work has spanned. And I look forward to getting into all that and more. Especially interested in hearing about what you are planning on talking about at this year's Verbal Behavior Conference. But before we get to that, though, let's start like we always do here on the podcast. I want to hear about how you discovered behavior analysis, what made you want to pursue it as a career, and kind of trace that up to what you're doing these days.
Yeah. So growing up, I always knew I wanted to go into some sort of profession that allowed me to help people. I thought that meant being a physician, like a medical doctor. My dad was a medical doctor, and we would bond over things like watching surgery on TV. Or one night he cut his hand washing dishes late at night and he needed stitches. And so we like rushed to his office and he let me be the one to like stitch him up.
Really?
So yeah.
How old were you at the time?
Gosh, in high school?
Okay. All right.
Ninth grade, maybe something like that.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, and he would always let me do things like that. Like one time my cousin got a big cut too. And he let me put on like the goggles and help like pull the glass out, which I don't know how my cousin felt about that, but, anyway, yeah. So I was convinced that I wanted to go into medicine. And so I went to undergrad and I was a pre-med major, University of Florida. And most parents, when you tell them that you want to go into medicine or be a lawyer, are like super thrilled. My dad kind of discouraged it. He was like, having gone through med school himself and then having to take the exams again to be able to practice in the States. He would just talk about how hard it was and tell me stories about like pulling all-nighters and study groups and taking turns sleeping so they didn't oversleep. And then like just how competitive it was. And I just was never a competitive person. Like I was the type of kid who, like playing tennis growing up, if I was in a tournament and they matched me against a beginner, I'd be like giving them pointers, like tilt your racket up, point your racket to where you want the ball to go. So like competition was not really my thing, although I will say that I can get pretty competitive when it comes to board games. So I have to have a little discllor there in case we ever play a board game.
Yeah, in case one of your family members checks us out and they're like, not so much.
But yeah, so like second year in college, I was in a biology class and we were about to take an exam and the professor steps out to get some like exam materials or something like that. And a student in the row behind me stands up and she kind of starts going on this rant about how like she's going to be the best and she's going to beat us all and we're all going to fail and she's going to succeed. And I was like, what? Like, I remember thinking to myself, this is undergrad. Like, we're not even in med school yet. And so that was kind of like a turning point for me. But I think also if I recall, I got like a C or a D in that class too. So I don't think I was doing so hot as a pre-med. So I kind of decided to switch majors, go into psychology, and then I graduate from college and I wait tables for like a year and a half. Because everyone knows that if you are psychology major, you kind of have to go to grad school to do anything with your degree.
Indeed.
And I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with psychology. So I kind of did some volunteer work with a family friend, helping do some like diagnostics and things like that. And didn't really love it. So I happened to be going back to Gainesville to visit some friends. And while I was there, I stopped by campus and I stopped by the psychology department and I run into Chris Bullock, who was the TA for my lab in basic behavior analysis with Hackenberg. And I'm kind of telling him like, my woes, like, I don't know what to do with my life. What should I do? And he's like, well, did you like the lab? And I was like, absolutely. But I thought it was great. I just don't want to work with pigeons and rats. Like, I just had no idea. Right. So he's like, well, do you like working with individuals with developmental disabilities, for example? And I was like, totally. I've, all through high school, I had volunteered at a place called like Up with Down Syndrome, volunteered at Special Olympics, things like that. So I was like, yeah. So he's like, well, why don't you go and see if you can work with Brian Iwata and take his applied lab as a post-bac. So I was like, sure. So I go and I apply and Brian Iwata lets me take his lab. And while I'm working in his lab, I'm also working at the ARC, which is one of the research sites that they're doing research in. And I just love it. I just fell in love with applied behavior analysis, as I think most people who end up pursuing it do.
Sure.
And, I'm seeing just simple like contingency management, working with the adults that I'm working with, and just like seeing them get excited about things. And so I'm like, okay, I like this. And I'm like, what do I do next? So Brian Awada suggests that I go work at Kennedy Krieger or Marcus. And so I do. I applied to Kennedy Krieger. I get the job. And I head over to Baltimore, and I'm on the inpatient unit. And again, I'm just loving it. And I think from there on, I've just been lucky to come across people who I really respect in the field and who have taken enough interest in me to give me some guidance along the way. Sungwoo, so at Kennedy Krieger, that's where I met my now husband, Kevin Lazinski. And Sungwoo was like, you guys should see if you can work with Greg Handley and Rachel Thompson. I think you guys would do great working with them. And so we looked into working with them and went over to Kansas with them. And then kind of, again, just from there on, just people sort of pointed me in the right direction or in a direction. I kind of figured out like what along the way were my reinforcers and what were not, right? And just kind of discovered it from there. Doing a postdoc here at Monroe-Meyer, I was in the severe behavior program doing a postdoc under Wayne Fisher. Mm-hmm. And when I completed my postdoc, there was an opening in early intervention. And so I applied to that. And since then, I've just sort of been in love with early intervention work. And I think I just love, I don't know, I just love all the challenges along the way, or when something comes up that I have to figure out, or when something's not working, like, what do we do now? Or I don't know, the discovery process.
So for those who aren't familiar with the Monroe-Meyer Center, and particularly the area in which you work there, would you like to take a minute and just kind of describe what that setting is like and what your mission is and things like that?
Yeah. So here at the Monroe-Meyer Institute, we are, working primarily with individuals with some sort of developmental disability, a big focus on autism. And there's a lot of services that we provide here, some of which are behavior analytic, but we also have other programs like speech and language, OT, PT. And so we can really provide sort of those, like a cohesive set of services for children that are coming in if they need more than one thing. Monroe-Meyer, so Wayne Fisher and Kathleen Piazza were here for a while. They helped start the programs in severe behavior and early intervention, and then, of course, Kathleen in pediatric feeding. So we have those programs as well. And then we're a training institute. So we see a lot of interns come through, pre-docs, postdocs, master's program in applied behavior analysis. And then we also have a PhD program in applied behavior analysis, which is what I direct.
Are you looking for a new job, but you're overwhelmed with all the emails that you're getting from various ABA agencies? What if there was someone who was in your corner and could help you find the perfect job placement? Well, that person exists. Barbara Voss has been working as a recruiter for over 30 years, and her company, HRIC, specializes in placing BCBAs in permanent full-time positions throughout the United States. Barbara has been placing BCBAs since 2011, so she knows our business, and she offers personalized service to any BCBA looking for a new position. She also helps companies looking to hire BCBAs too. Here are just some of the things Barbara can help you with. She can provide information about salary ranges in different markets across the country. She can help you write your resume. She can coordinate and prepare you for the interview process, and even help negotiate the right salary for you. And best of all, there are no charges to any candidate for all of these services. When you're ready to make a change and want to work with someone who will listen to you and understand what you need in a new position, contact Barbara at HRIC. To schedule a confidential discussion, head over to hricolorado.com. Again, that's hricolorado.com, and hit the contact button to connect with Barbara. You won't be disappointed. I would love to talk, as I alluded to earlier, you've done a lot of different things in very cool topic areas. And so I'd like to ask you some questions that may sound random, but there's a lot of different topics to get into here. So one of the areas that some of your work I saw from several years ago is with individuals who have challenging behaviors related to the arrangement or ordering of items and things like that. Just these restricted and flexible repertoires. I guess that's the language that I could think about when thinking about some of these kids. And I know this is something that anyone who works with individuals with autism has encountered at one point or another. So I guess where I'd like to start with this is that I'd like you to describe at least some of your contributions to this literature, and just more generally share what you've learned about what works and what doesn't work supporting individuals who have these very inflexible repertoires, need things just so, or need things just exactly lined up, and all those things that are we kind of consider in some respects hallmarks for many individuals with ASD.
Yeah. So, like you mentioned, restricted and repetitive behavior is characteristic. It's a diagnostic characteristic of individuals with autism. I think as a behavior analyst, we're used to talking about what's been referred to in the literature as lower level repetitive behavior. So things like motor stereotypy, vocal stereotypy. But like you said, many of us have encountered many different forms, like the arranging and ordering, or having to have things just so, or circumscribed interests. So this is actually related to my dissertation, and Rachel Thompson and I had kind of looked at this, and we were at New England Center for Children at that point in time, and certainly had encountered some individuals with problem behavior around like having their arranging and ordering interrupted or blocked or something along those lines. And so we decided to kind of to dig into some of this literature, and really found that there wasn't a lot, especially at that time, on what to do. There may be a couple studies on how to assess and treat problem behavior related to interruption of problem behavior, but nothing related to studying the arranging and ordering itself. And so we basically decided to do an assessment and treatment of arranging and ordering. And kind of to your point, Matt, regarding like what are the sort of things that we learned, I guess I would say, making sure that I think there is some value in the assessment portion in terms of like, okay, yes, you're probably pretty sure that it's automatic reinforcement, but can you dig in a little bit deeper about what is automatically reinforcing about it? And so we did this one additional assessment with this one kiddo that we were working with, and she actually engaged in this really fascinating type of arranging and ordering. So she would arrange and ordering like large pieces of furniture. And so like if you left her in the living room for just a second to go grab something in the other room, like all of a sudden you'd start hearing like furniture moving in the living room. And I'm talking like big, heavy, like pieces, like couches and bookshelves that aren't the most sturdy, like, and then those old school like TV cabinets. So you can see how that might be problematic. Mm-hmm. But we did this assessment, and we tried to see like, could we identify, is it that she just likes moving things around? Because if she likes moving things around, then maybe we can find something more appropriate for her to move around. Or is it that she wants things in a certain place? And if that's the case, well, if that place is appropriate, then let's just let her have it in that place. That's fine. But it turns out that the product was the reinforcer. So we kind of did this assessment where we let her tell us more or less where she wanted to put things, and then leave the room while I moved it all. And it turns out that it was all like squished in the corner of the room. So not where wasn't appropriate to just leave there forever. But we did learn something about kind of what was reinforcing about it. I think in terms of, what to do and how to support individuals in this area, I think it's important to kind of think about what is it that is problematic about the behavior. So it's not like you can't straighten a book on your bookshelf, or if your frame's off kilter, you can't fix it, especially if it's your own items. But, with Christy, that was her name in the manuscript, she arranging and ordering large pieces of furniture, that's not the safest thing. One of the other kids in the study, he would arrange and order like items in a trash can. So he'd pass a trash can, and if he would just kind of then dig in and just start straightening items in the trash can. And
wow.
Yeah. And obviously that's not,
it's not okay.
Yeah, that's not okay. His therapist would describe like him darting across like in the mall to some stranger to pull like some thread off their shirt or something like that. So you can see like, again, what is it that's problematic about the behavior, and can we address that? So some of these things we kind of got to in the study and sort of identifying like what is okay to arrange and order and what's not. But certainly just thinking about it, like, and then I think there might also be something to learn in terms of the research. So a lot of these behaviors are described as compulsive-like behavior. And there's a lot of research in that area with individuals diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder. And so I wonder how much we can learn from that literature base as well, in terms of like things like exposure response prevention and graduated exposure and things like that. Mm-hmm. Which in some ways, the treatment that we use, which was like, we ended up for all the participants, if I recall correctly, having to do some level of just blocking, and then trying to teach an appropriate alternative as well, or like appropriate ways to engage with materials and things like that.
I see. And so I can see, just kind of scrolling back a minute or two, is that I could totally see the a lot of the discourse in functional analysis and functional assessment these days is like, let's try to provide the reinforcers for the individuals that maintain the problem behavior. And that just obviously with the trash can example, or darting across a mall to, put your hands on a random stranger, that those don't seem like socially valid or acceptable outcomes for sure. So I was wondering, so can you talk a little bit more about how with individuals like that, were those outcomes generalized in community settings? In other words, with regard to blocking and things like that, is that something that I think probably the everyday behavior analyst listening to this can, who's maybe not working in a research setting, because it can wrap their minds around perhaps the conceptual piece of this, the conceptual analysis of this. But can you talk about how it might start from the clinic and transition to more generalized settings?
Yeah, I mean, I think, with the participants in our study, they were, yes, we went out into the residential, there was like a residential program and a school program. And then we did go on some trips. I think that anytime that you're looking at generalization, it's good to program that and practice it. And practice it to the degree that you can, that it's going to be successful. So if you can go to, and I'm just kind of talking off the cuff here, not necessarily what we did in the study, but if you were to go to a mall and sort of, can you contrive situations in which you do bait someone who's there who has something that is going to cause a problem. So maybe that's, I don't know, seems kind of silly because you don't know if he'll pick up on that from that far away, but if you can bait those and then teach it under those settings, and maybe when at a time when the mall is not like super packed, and kind of those controlled settings, and sort of start programming towards generalization, I think that you're more likely to get those outcomes. But I do think that a lot of times in the research, we kind of stop before the generalization phase. And that's a problem, where we need to make sure that this is working, but it's working in all settings. And I think just, you could probably be, thoughtful in the approach in terms of trying to do so in a way that is going to allow you as a therapist to be successful in a safe setting, and then test it across other settings. It's just sort of like, the more the better, or the more the better in terms of how representative it is of the situations that are problematic.
Very good. So I want to, in many ways, I think this is this conversation is kind of, it's going to sound like, Nicole Rodriguez, this is your life, because I'm just picking various papers from your CV that I thought were interesting to ask you questions of. So, I guess that I'm saying that as much as a way to
segue to the next random.
Yes, to almost apologize for the awkward segue to the next unrelated paper, but anyway. So having said all that, so you have a recent paper in JABA, it's Hood et al. 2019, that discussed the effect of physical reactions to aggressive behavior. I would love for you to give us kind of the thumbnail sketch of that paper. This is a topic that I'm fascinated by. There's been some other work in this area, some of it by Fisher and Piazza back in the 90s that I'm certainly. But so can you tell us a little bit about this study? What did you learn from it? Is this an active line of research that we can expect more work in, and so on?
Yeah, so this is one of those studies that was kind of driven by a clinical issue. And it actually, the first participant, it took us, I think what makes it difficult to follow this specific line, at least in terms of studying when physical reaction or the flinching or blocking is a reinforcer, is finding the participants, the kid for which that is a reinforcer. And so I think that asking that specific question could be hard. But this kind of came about actually when Kevin and I were postdocs here at Monroe Meyer was the first participant. And then we came across a second participant more recently. And there was this kid that we were treating for severe problem behavior and mainly aggression. And that you work with some of those kids that you can tell they are getting a kick out of the reactions that they're causing, right?
Yeah.
Same thing with that led to us looking at chase as a reinforcer for elopement, which I was surprised that no one had looked at that. They are loving being chased. They're getting a big kick out of it. And his forms of aggression actually were also somewhat indicative of that. So he would come at you with a overhead fist and then just stop 2 inches from your face.
Mm.
And you how do you not flinch? How do you not try to protect yourself? You just have to. And I guess the problem with that was we're doing this functional analysis, and we decided to start with a pairwise functional analysis of attention, just based off of the interview and talking to parents. And we had very limited time with him in the clinic. And so we are trying to just evaluate vocal attention, just standard, what you might expect in a functional analysis. But our data are all over the place. And it's because we're providing intermittent reinforcement, right? We're we cannot help but not flinch. And so I remember going to talk to Wayne Fisher about this and sort of describing what the issue was and describing how I was convinced that he loved the flinching. And we're trying to figure out, how do we evaluate that? And then again, how do you treat it? And anyone who's ever worked with Wayne Fisher knows that not only is he brilliant, but he's also super creative, especially when it comes to clinical stuff. And so he started talking about arranging this concurrent operant arrangement. So we kind of tossed around different ideas. And what we ended up with was we were going to have 2 therapists in the room, and one of them was going to be associated with blocking and flinching. And then with Ed was the first kid. We also provided some vocal attention. And then the other one was going to be associated with minimal. So we're kind of comparing purposeful flinching. We're acting constantly FR1, higher quality versus lower quality, lower density. And the way that we try to make sure that the second person would not react as strongly was they were kind of facing the corner of the room, blocking their head like non-contingently from the beginning of session. Mm-hmm. And so we were able to show through that, which I thought was just a really creative, neat way to kind of get at how do you control your physical reactions enough to evaluate whether it is a reinforcer. Now, the trick is obviously, okay, once you identify that it's a reinforcer, what the heck do you do then, right? Because it's really hard. And I mean, there was one session, like he had some moves, right? Like there was one session where he grabbed the back of my shirt and like pulled it over my head and just like dragged me to the ground, like a wrestling move. So like, you knew that like he was pulling out all the stops.
So for anyone who thinks like this ivory tower stuff about academia is, being a desk BCBA and not in the mix of it, I think that story right there will disabuse many listeners. So I just thank you for that.
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
that's
go
pretty
ahead.
Embarrassing too, but whatever.
I think everybody has a story like that who's worked with kids who are, who are aggressive, in one context or another. But yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of people listening to this nodding their head. Yep. Like, yep, I've been there. Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, I think the trick is getting to the treatment portion, and that's where you have to get sort of creative. And there's a line of research on, that's not necessarily related to physical reactions, but more so on function-based treatments with and without extinction in place. There's a study by Athens and Ballmer that basically looked at modifying like the relative quality, density of reinforcement for appropriate behavior versus inappropriate behavior. I believe Hagopian and DeLeon have some research in this area as well. So so I don't know. I think that's more or less.
Yeah, kind of, I think one of the things that's interesting about studies like this and studies like the Fisher Piazza et al. I think there was a study from like 96 or 97 where they looked at the differing types of quality of vocal attention. So they made different types of statements in different conditions, which it's like one a job as short as papers. But for me, it was one of like the most, it kind of confirmed like everyday clinicians' hunches that, there is, attention is not a monolith. So I think, work like yours and that other paper, I think are helpful for folks who are new to the field and they just think attention is don't do that. There's so many different ways in which, reactions can manifest and maintain repertoires of challenging behavior. And I do think that, and I have worked with individuals that, when they get to becoming aggressive, they're like it reminds me of like a video game. They're trying to beat the boss at the end of the level, and I when you said this kid had some moves, there's many individuals I work with who are, like you go to block one way and they're coming up with another combination. It's like they're Rocky or something like that. Yeah. It's really amazing how these repertoires get shaped up over time. So yeah, I can definitely resonate with that.
I think it's also like, we talk about the functional analysis and we're so used to talking about like, stop that, don't do that. And kind of this sort of specific way that we provide attention. But I think that ecological validity is really important too. And so when you're doing, and even talking about some of like Hanley's work and really that emphasis on that initial interview is really kind of trying to figure out what are the types of vocal attention that are provided in the forms, because functional analysis is not just about trying to figure out like, is attention a reinforcer, is escape a reinforcer, but it's also trying to like get at what is maintaining the behavior already in the natural environment, right? So to the extent that we can kind of model that and bring that into the functional analysis is important.
Yeah, those qualitative interviews are really, really helpful for sure. All right, cool. So another random segue. So again, we mentioned the Verbal Behavior Conference earlier in the conversation. It's coming up right around the corner. I'd like to hear what you're going to talk about at the Verbal. We don't want to give it away because we want people to sign up, right?
Right.
And the links to sign up along with the promo code will be in the show notes of this episode. Let me just put that out there real quick. Give us a taste of what you're going to talk about. And more generally, I know this is just yet another area you do research in. So I'd love to hear about the types of work you're doing in this area, and any advice in terms of teaching verbal operants and things like that that you could share with the listeners. That would be great to talk about as well.
Yeah, so I am planning on talking about teaching multiply controlled verbal behavior. So there's two talks. The first one is looking at teaching interverbal tax, which is just a really fancy way of saying how to answer different questions about like the same picture item. So if I were to hold up like a purple teddy bear, and sometimes I ask, what is it? And sometimes I ask, what color? And a lot of times what we'll see is even if, kiddos can tack different animals and know their colors, that they kind of only respond. They're not listening to the question. They're just responding to the visual stimulus. And so this is the first talk is sort of related to some challenges that I had encountered trying to teach this skill several years ago, and kind of the journey and trying to figure out what are the component skills that might lead to the emergence of being able to answer different questions about the same item. And then I kind of go into, in my second talk, I want to talk about sort of this idea of like curriculum sequences and teaching certain skills that lead to the emergence of others, and then just other approaches, because in the last year, there's been like 2 studies. So nothing on interverbal tax really before this, but in the last year, there's been 2 studies related to this. And they have some of the same conceptual background to the way that we decided to tackle it. So sort of the stuff that we plan on talking about at the Verbal Behavior Conference.
Hey everyone, just want to take a quick break here. In case you don't get a chance to check out the show notes, I want to let you know that if you are interested in the Verbal Behavior Conference, you can go to behaviorlive.com/VBC. And you can sign up for the conference there. It's a 2-day event. It will include 13 CEUs. I will be also hosting a panel with the speakers, which I did last year. It's great fun, and I'm sure it will be again in 2021 also. So for more information, again, go to behaviorlive.com/VBC. And if you do choose to sign up, use the code podcast10 at checkout to save on your registration.
Your second question. Oh, what are some of the stuff we're doing now? Yeah. So yes, a lot of my research is all over the place, but I promise I'm trying. I am trying to have a line of research. I really am.
We'll get to that in a minute.
My research could probably be described as like, ooh, squirrel. So let's see. I have 2 doc students right now. One is doing his dissertation on descriptive autoclitics. So I'm trying to stick with verbal behavior. And basically just there's a study by Howard and Rice in the late 80s that looked at teaching descriptive autoclitics to typically developing kids. And we're going to try to extend that to kids with autism. And what I mean by descriptive autoclitics is like, if I were to show you a distorted heart or shape or something, that you can say it's like a heart. And what I really like about Todd's study is that we also have this sort of generalization test that's like a game where the participant is looking at a screen of, let's say, like, I don't know exactly how many, but like 6 or 8 different animals. And some of them are common and some of them are uncommon. And we'll circle one. And then the kid has to get Todd to pick the right stimulus from the right picture, the right animal from a pile of pictures. And so, for example, if we were to circle, what is that? What's the animal at the zoo that kind of looks like a zebra or has the stripes of a zebra?
I don't know.
Oh gosh. Okay. Different example.
There's probably people yelling at their phones. It's a
different example.
Fill in the blank.
A puffin. Puffin looks like a penguin. So if we were to circle the puffin and the kid said it's like a penguin, then Todd would hold up the puffin and then they'd get like whatever point or whatever. So so that's Todd's study. And then my other student, Des, she is working on developing a protocol now, or we finished the protocol. We're working on her proposal. And it actually is related to, I saw that Vince is going to be talking about teaching yes-no responding. Mm-hmm. So I'm really interested to see that talk. Des is also looking at teaching yes-no responding and based on like using or the conceptualization of joint control, which I have a feeling Vince is going to go down that route as well. So I'm really excited to see that. So that's more or less some of the stuff going on. We have some manning for information stuff across operants, I do a lot of like looking at desirable and undesirable generalization or generalization across operants, which is so intriguing to me that you don't get generalization across operants until you start doing like some multiple exemplar training and things like that. But that's more or less the sort of stuff that we have going on right now.
Very cool. And I look forward to seeing the talk for sure. And again, that's the Verbal Behavior Conference is coming up. I think it's the 20th and 21st or 21st and 22nd of April. Again, I'll have all the 22nd
and 23rd.
Oh, okay.
That's okay.
We'll get there.
I'll just get there early. No, I'm just kidding.
That's right. I'll just be sitting in an empty Zoom room. Let's see. I actually have this. We can solve this. Yes. You're. Not that I doubted you, but it's the 22nd and 23rd. I just have to look at my calendar there real quick. All right, very cool. So another area that I really am interested in, I know that you've been involved in some outreach to Spanish-speaking consumers, and you've received funding for doing so. And this is a topic I think that we could probably devote an entire episode to, but real brief, I'd like to give you an opportunity to talk about some of this work and at the same time, if there's any lessons or good things to know or tips or whatever for listeners who might be serving either a Spanish-speaking, population or just a bilingual population more generally, or non-English-speaking population more generally.
Yeah, no, this is a good question, and obviously something that's receiving more attention, especially in behavior analysis in terms of culturally sensitive practices and things like that, which is really nice to see. I guess I should say I'm not an expert in the area by any means. I know that there are people who dedicate their careers to practicing or evaluating culturally sensitive practices, but I could probably speak from my own experiences in terms of growing up in a Hispanic family and growing up in South Florida, Miami, Florida, which has a really dense population of Hispanics, and then like moving around since then and working with Spanish speaking families, because I think it's hard to know what you know and what you don't know until you kind of have some sort of relative experience, right? So what is unique to a specific culture until you kind of experience other cultures, for example. So I think that one of the reasons that I wanted to do this sort of outreach was in Omaha specifically, there is a Hispanic population here, or Latino population, but if you are just Spanish speaking, there's not a lot of people who are bilingual, and certainly not a lot of behavior analysts, at least, maybe more RBTs now specifically, but not a lot of behavior analysts that are bilingual. And so it's really hard to, like, sure, you can use interpretive services, and we work at a hospital here, and so we're lucky to have those services, but a lot is lost in translation. I feel like you could probably imagine that too, just even like and I guess interpreters are also taught to like not, they're just supposed to say what the person said, right? And not add anything else. But I think in the Hispanic culture that it's almost hurts us to a degree, because there's something like, I feel like in the Hispanic culture, things are just much more personable. People beyond just the professional relationship. Like even growing up, if I think about it, all the my doctor that I went to, or the dentist or the orthodontist, like I knew we always would chit chat and about their family and the vacation they just went on and what they're doing next week. You know what I mean? Like you just get to know them at a different level. And I feel like when you're actually there's a story related to this is, my mom and her husband came to visit Omaha. Her husband, Eduardo, doesn't speak any English, and he had just gotten back surgery and he had been cleared to travel. And while he was here, he kind of had started getting like fevers and things like that. So we're worried that it might be some infection. And we went over to UNMC and he was admitted and whatnot. And my mom was there and she speaks English and Spanish and was able to translate, but she wanted to kind of head home, and they had been there like overnight and wanted to head home, like shower and grab some things. So I said I would walk over there and hang out because I'm on campus. Mm-hmm. And he was about to go get like MRI, and I wasn't cleared to be the one to translate for him. So we had to go through interpretive services. So I basically had the vantage point of I can understand the doctor, I can understand the interpreter, and then I can understand Eduardo, right? And I just felt, not to any fault of anyone, but it was very like transactional. And you kind of lost that like bedside manner. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It was just...
Nicole, was there a part of you that wanted to jump in and say, he means this?
Yes.
Or like this is really important or whatever.
Yeah, no. And I did. I did. I was like, even if Eduardo wasn't asking a specific question, like I was in there and I was just like, and I was trying to like, when it was all said and done, I was trying to like add a little bit more like of the, I don't know, like bedside manner, I guess, for
Sure.
Eduardo, because I know he was like nervous. But yeah, so I think, that doesn't really help if you don't know Spanish. Obviously, having an interpreter is what you need, right? Like mm-hmm. that's better than nothing. I think if you are in a position where you are hiring staff to the extent that you can like hire staff whose diversity reflects the diversity of the population you're serving, well, that's wonderful, right? Because I do think that there are things that do get lost in translation. And then, I mean, I think there's probably something to be said for if you are working with a family from a different culture to kind of look up what is most likely those practices or values that might be unique to that culture, while also keeping an open mind and not making assumptions, because we all know that we're speaking in generalities. Mm-hmm. But I do think that, especially with working with Spanish-speaking families, there's something to be said for the relationship beyond the professional relationship. I mean, the other day, we just moved into a new clinic and I walked out to one of the cars to talk to the mom and to tell her about like our new pickup and drop off procedures and things like that. And we spent at least a good 10 minutes just talking about like how she's doing, and she has like some medical issues and how that's going, and her family and this and that. And I just think that there's something important to knowing them and caring for them and their family beyond just the services that you're providing.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like, you're emphasizing the rapport building process, perhaps more generally. So, for behavior analysts working with interpreters, it sounds like, at least from your experience with Eduardo there, that, it may make sense to, and I don't know if this is within the mandate of the interpreter to do this, or if it's just the facts, but like if you could say something like, hey, it's really important to emphasize or can you make sure this person understands, fill in the blank, and perhaps, more clearly and intentionally.
Yeah. Trying to overcome.
Describe some of those things that would constitute overtures of rapport building or bedside manner or whatever you want to call it. That might perhaps cause the interpreter some that may or may not cause the interpreter some conflict in terms of what their ability to just report the facts are. As I was listening to your answer, I was, there's a behavior analyst here in New England. She's from Connecticut, Dr. Solange Forte, and she does great work. She came to New Hampshire and did an event for New Hampshire ABA a few years ago, and does some great work on talking about working with interpreters and what you can, a lot of do's, many don'ts also in terms of working with non-English speaking populations and things like that. So if you get a chance to
I'd be really interested to hear about that. Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of people who are looking into this and kind of sort of best practices, but I never really thought about what to do to kind of overcome. Like, an interpreter obviously is great, especially when met with like the other option, which is just not being able to communicate at all.
Yeah.
But that's really interesting. I would want to look into that for sure.
Yeah, I think she did an episode with ABA Inside Trek. I'll try to run that down and put it in the show notes for this episode as well.
Yeah. Cool.
All right. So again, that's a topic we could spend much more time on, but for the purposes of this particular conversation, I learned recently that you won an award for excellence in university instruction. So I want to take advantage of your knowledge here and see if what are, especially these days where there's so many people being called upon to do adjunct teaching. We did an episode about teaching behavior analysis with a couple of episodes ago with Greg Madden and Flo and Derek, yeah. And so we talked a lot about that then. And I was curious to, what is your perspective on university instruction? Have these strategies that you employed changed since this move to online instruction, to the extent to which that's affected you guys out there in Nebraska?
Yeah. So I guess I should say that I've made a very concerted effort at becoming a better teacher and a better mentor and a better advisor and leader and whatnot. And I think that I was fortunate actually at Western New England. I took a course with Greg Hanley on teaching in the college environment, I think it was called, or something along those lines. And so we reviewed evidence-based strategies and things like backward design, like what are the skills that you want people to have when they leave your program or when they leave your course, and then designing your course and your assignments around that to give them lots of opportunity to practice those skills and get feedback and things like that. I think in terms of, so I primarily teach, not primarily, I teach in the PhD program. So I'm working in our PhD program, admits students that already have their master's degrees. So I'm working with individuals who already have sort of a baseline knowledge, and we're just like digging in deep into a lot of topics, which is a ton of fun and a lot of fun for me in particular. Like, I get out of class and sometimes I'm like jazzed, like I'm all hyped up. But I think that some of the things that go into teaching beyond that is beyond just like the evidence-based practices and things like that. I really just care about the success of the students, not just in their professional, like how they succeed in the course or succeed as professionals, but also just like their well-being. And I think that has sort of, that guides a lot of what I do. And then also I try to, like, as I'm prepping for course, like channel some of the excitement that I felt when I first contacted that material, or even what sometimes new ideas as I'm contacting it again, because anytime you're reading the same article, you're coming at it with a new history, right? You're a different person when you contact that material again. And so, just trying to have bring some of that enthusiasm and sort of the things that made me fall in love with like behavior analysis and the things that we're talking about and bringing that to the class. In terms of moving to online, like initially, a lot of my classes are just discussion based where I facilitate discussion. And sometimes, I always have a backup plan, but like it kind of just goes how it goes. And I know which take home points I want to hit on. But I'm willing to like let it go in new and interesting directions. And if not, I have a backup plan and sometimes it works out well and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes it works out well and it's not how I planned. And I just pretend it's how I planned. So
I think you have a future in podcasting.
Exactly. No, I don't think so. But yeah, so I think that I lost my train of thought. But
so the discussion is probably, pretty
it's
easier to facilitate on a Zoom or a Google Meet or whatever platform you're using, as opposed to teaching intro to behavior analysis to undergraduates, where you're kind of doing more kind of lecture type of instruction.
Yeah. And I don't even use a lot of like PowerPoint. Actually, it was easier to pull up like articles and graphs on Zoom than it is because I could also do it in person. But yeah. And I think also I'm just kind of spoiled. Like I think our cohorts have been pretty awesome and moving into like the Zoom platform. We just kind of figured it out and people just unmute and they still talk. And we had to like stumble across some stuff. And of course, when COVID just went down, like I needed to call in, like reinforce, like help because, I was with no childcare, trying to teach a class, trying to run a clinic with things changing every single hour with new information. And so I'm not sure I did a wonderful job of the quick switch to online instruction, I should say, but I did call in some help and trying to finish off that class, and the students were really understanding and kind of, I don't know, we just all made it work, just like everyone. And things started to go down, was just like, all right, how are we doing this? Guess we're figuring it out.
I figure build a plane while you're flying it, for sure.
Exactly. That's a good analogy.
Okay, last break of the episode. I want to invite you to take a look at the various patron tiers over at patreon.com/behavioral observations. There are a variety of tiers to suit your budget, and they each have their own kind of corresponding levels of benefits, which is a patron way of saying stuff that you get for signing up. And so some of those include ad-free podcasts, so you don't have to listen to commercial interruptions like this one. They also include, some of them include merchandise like stickers. Others include hangouts that we do on Zoom periodically, as well as bonus content that is subscriber only. And I'm looking to do a little bit more of that in 2021. So it's a very fast-growing community, and I would invite you to see if it's something that you'd be interested in checking out. So again, you can go to patreon.com/behavioral observations, or you can just go to behavioralobservations.com, and there's a menu item right at the top that says Patreon. You just click that, and you can check it out and see if there is something there that will work for you. All right, I think that's it for that. So let's get back to this conversation with Nicole. Your career has obviously covered so many different topics, and I have to imagine that in academia, there's probably considerable inertia or contingencies that would shape people's repertoires in the opposite direction. If you want to, get all your publications, perhaps, and I'm guessing because I'm not an academic, but I know enough about it to be dangerous. But if you the so-called inch wide, mile deep metaphor, might allow you to really dig into one particular silo, if you will, and just crank out lots and lots of pubs on that and whatnot. So you've taken the opposite approach, it seems like, And I think what's really admirable about when and I didn't know this, until we had this conversation, but it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the variability in your research interests are driven by client need, as opposed to the other way around. It's like, oh, I'm interested in, I don't know, behavioral momentum or whatever, and so I'm going to actively recruit individuals to really look at this, whereas it looks like you're taking a clinician's point of view of this and say, I don't have control about who comes through the door, but they're coming through the door presenting with X, and so this is a unique problem that we not only need to solve, but if we can add to the literature to help elucidate this problem, so I'd love for you to kind of expand on that a little bit in terms of your point of view, in terms of how you choose some of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, Matt. I think that it's exactly that. So I kind of talk about it in terms of there's different types of research, and some of it is like clinically driven, and some of it's intended to fill some sort of gap in the research where you then go actively recruit participants. And I've done a little bit of both, but primarily I am in a clinical setting, and I am overseeing a clinic, and we do come across issues, and sometimes we come across issues and we struggle through them, and we try to do so in a systematic fashion. And sometimes those end up just in a file drawer, and then we try again and we do better. Right. And we figure out something. And so why not share that with others so that they can learn from that as well? So if we come across a unique situation or a unique approach to a problem and we discover something, then we want to share that with others. Some of it too is just like people have come to me with specific interests that I want to reinforce their interests in research. So I have had BCBAs who aren't necessarily pursuing their PhD or RBTs even, who are like, hey, I'm really interested in, for example, we had, there'll be a new study that's coming out that's completely different than anything that I've done. And it's on abduction prevention skills and desirable and undesirable generalization with those skills. And it was prompted by an abduction attempt that was reported in the newspaper here in Omaha, and a family coming and saying, we're scared and we want our kids to learn these safety skills. And then the RBT came to me and they're like, can we do this? And can we do this in a way that would like turn into something that we can share? And we're like, absolutely. So I want to kind of reinforce that interest and looking into things in a systematic fashion and trying to push the way that we do things and looking more towards generalization and things like that, at least with this specific study. So, and then sometimes it's like even the intraverbal tact stuff that I'll be talking at the Verbal Behavior Conference, like we failed at least 2 or 3 times before we stopped and kind of digged into the literature or dug into the literature and just figured out, okay, maybe this would be the right approach. And we've just sort of, if anything, that might be a line of research for me, because there's like 3 different studies that have come out of that sort of question. But yeah, I think it's a lot of it is just, like you said, there's something that comes up and it's interesting, or we look at the literature and there's nothing in that area and we learn something and we want to share it. Or there's something that like maybe it's even an opportunity. Like we just got this awesome virtual reality lab here at Monroe Meyer.
Cool.
Yeah, like there's these donors that just donated all this wonderful equipment. And so I'm working with Dr. Geringer there on trying to develop a study looking at pedestrian safety skills. So I tried to think of something that we kind of sent out a survey to all the families and we're like, hey, what is a skill that you would love to work on that you think is super important for your kid, that we might be able to leverage something like virtual reality, and crossing the street came up and I was like, yes, that's something that I want my kids in,
Indeed.
Like my little 2-year-old. So it's an opportunity, and it's like, well, I'm not going to not pursue it because I'm trying to create a line of research, which I know is useful in some settings. I think it depends. So going back to your question, like, what are the contingencies for having a line versus not having a line? And it depends on what institute you're in. I'm assuming an R1 institute where research is, top research institute, that it's helpful to have a line of research, because if you're going to apply for grants and you want to convince someone to give you money, then you should probably show that you're an expert in the area that you're about to research. So I'm sure there are contingencies. Fortunately, I'm in a place that I think is the contingencies do allow for some variability in what I study. And also I guess also there's a lot of people, there are people who have modeled variability, like Linda LeBlanc, right? Mm. She's done stuff in OBM, geriatric populations, autism. Now, of course, Wayne Fisher, Rachel Thompson has done some stuff in infant, sign language and things like that. Now, of course, those people are way more prolific than I am, so that probably helps. But so I think there may be contingencies. There's certainly some value in pursuing a line of research. I think it's important to follow things through. Mm-hmm. Mine tends to be a little bit, like I said, ooh, squirrel, and I'm just excited and I decide like this is what I want to study. And it definitely comes with its own challenges, because now I have to like dig into a whole new literature base. Like with the virtual reality stuff, our lab is like, okay, well, this is not something you could just be like, oh, I'm deciding to study virtual reality. Like you need to like figure out what's been done already.
I see.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, those are some important considerations for sure.
Yeah. So it does sometimes require a lot more legwork in terms of digging into the literature and the lit review and design, and having that also inform what you're doing.
Got it. Well, I appreciate you sharing your thinking on that. It's a really interesting topic to pick apart. So, so Nicole, there's again, I think with each one of these questions we could have gone way longer on. So I appreciate you resisting the urge to well, I guess go on and on, or dig deeper into it. Perhaps we can set some of these topics up specifically for another conversation down the road. But in the interest of time, I want to be able to let you go here shortly. So let's wrap up the podcast here. And I would love to hear what your advice for the newly minted BCBA is.
Yeah, so I've thought about this. I know that this is kind of how you wrap up your podcast. So trying to think of something that is valuable, but also perhaps a little bit different from what other folks have said. And I think one of the advice that I would have is, we have a very effective technology. We're really good as behavior analysts from getting from like point A to point B. But applied behavior analysis, social validity is really important. It's an important value for behavior analysts. And I think that making sure that we are checking in with the families that we serve, and even sometimes the kids themselves, and checking in terms of like the social validity of our goals, our outcomes, our procedures. There's oftentimes multiple paths to success. And so we have choices that we can go about teaching something in this way versus that way, or treating things in different ways. And I think making sure that we are checking in with the people we're serving in terms of targets, that same thing, but also just zooming out. So I think in early intervention work, I've sometimes come across people who are just sort of like checking off boxes of like what to teach next. And I think it's really important to consider that child, if you're working in early intervention, what are the issues that the family are experiencing? What are some of the barriers? Where are they in their learning process? What are the most important things for them now? Why am I working on this skill? Where does it fit within the big picture? and not getting lost in sort of like, I'm just going like, this is the next logical step, so I'm just going to keep on going. And then I think too, if you have the opportunity to create, so here in our early intervention program, we do have group peer review where we a couple times a week go over a specific case, and we serve right now about like 30 different kids in our clinic. And I think that that's valuable in terms of, especially for getting that like zoom out view, is getting other people to come in and be like, oh, okay, well, why are we working on this? Or have you thought about this? And getting some different viewpoints from people who are doing similar work. And I don't know how hard it is to set something like that up yourself, but if you can find some sort of way to set up something that allows you to recruit some feedback from someone else, I think that that could be really valuable too.
Excellent. That's great advice to end on. So if I'm hearing you correctly, attend to the social validity of what you're doing and try to establish a community of practitioners.
Yeah,
awesome.
Exactly. And I think that the social validity piece kind of also circles back to some of the things we were talking about, working with families from different cultures. I mean, if you're checking in with the families and really working with them to develop the goals and talk about the different options, and hopefully then you're in a better place, right?
Very cool. Awesome. Well, Dr. Nicole Rodriguez, this has been I usually use the word wide-ranging conversation, and it's just kind of like a vocal habit I've fallen into. And this is really, truly a wide-ranging conversation. So thanks so much for taking time out of your morning to join me and share this with the audience.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations Podcast with Matt Cicoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.